Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to have travel tip number one for 2025. I, for the most part, 95% of the time, use a third party platform called Cheapo Air. And Cheapo Air is cheap. There's no way around it. But you really have to be careful and you have to learn how to use the platform. If not, you will shoot yourself in the foot and you will have your foot in your mouth when you do it, and it won't be pretty. Okay? So here's the deal. I tell people all the time about Cheapo Air. And you can go on Cheapo Air, and for example, you might find a flight from Bucaramanga, Colombia, to Houston, to Albuquerque, New Mexico. But when you look down at total flight time, or total time for the trip, it's 38 hours. 38 hours! How on God's earth would you get 38 hours? Well, you might have a 12-hour layover in Houston and another 12-hour layover in Dallas, and by the time you get there, yeah, the ticket only cost you $400 round trip, but you got to spend 2 days in airports. So you have to be really, really careful when you pick a flight on Cheapo Air, and be sure and check total flight time. And I'll tell you how it works. For example, a couple of days ago, I looked up a flight for a gentleman on Spirit Airlines on Cheapo Air. Well, on Spirit Airlines, it was $187 one way from Bucaramanga to Fort Lauderdale. And on Cheapo Air was $167. And it was a direct flight, nonstop, 3 hours and 50 some minutes. Hoo-yah, you can't beat that. But if you go around trying to be real frugal and you want to fly from Bucaramanga to Miami, there's 1,000 ways you can go. You can fly from Bucaramanga to Panama City, to Fort Lauderdale, or to Miami, or you can fly from Bucaramanga to Bogota, to Medellin, to Cartagena, and then to Miami 28 hours later. Those flights exist, and they're cheap. But brother, they're not cheap. When you don't pay attention and you get flown around to 43 different cities, at some juncture in there, one of those airlines is going to try to rob you. I will guarantee that. So just be very careful. So when you look up cheap flights on Cheapo Air, do this. Make sure you don't have a deadline. Make sure you can wiggle your departure and arrival dates around. And if you do that, you can get some really inexpensive flights, but always beware and look up in the corner. It will give you the flight time from point A to point B. And if it's from Bucaramanga to Albuquerque, New Mexico, a standard flight time, a good flight time is 10 or 12 hours from start to finish. But if you're not careful, Maria and I spent almost 14 hours in the Atlanta airport in the winter at nighttime, and they don't have the heat turned on, and none of the stores are open to sell you anything, and it is miserable. Or like a friend of mine just did the other day, flew from Bucaramanga to Bogota to Medellin. I think he ended up in Cartagena and finally got to Fort Lauderdale. And then Avianca wouldn't let him out of town without a ticket out of Colombia. Oh, it was a mess. So I don't know how he turned out. But the tip of the day, travel tip of the day, use Cheapo Air. It's a good platform. Just learn how to use it. Be careful. Let the buyer beware. Caveat emptor. So, first day of the rest of your life, be sharp. Pay attention. Don't be stupid. don't fly 28 hours on a 3.5 hour flight. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good evening.